Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at itsjustino. And today is Tactical Tuesday. We're going to be breaking down a little bit of the Liverpool game. Let's be real. We're going to probably just talk about the first 30 minutes and break that down a little bit, talk about some of the positives and negatives from that game. And also, we're going to talk about XG today. There's been some graphics floating around that it's just interesting to me how they came out after the Liverpool game. They could have easily come out after the Watford game, but of course, when you lose a game, it's more interesting to put out a negative graphic highlighting our inability to score goals, our lack of goal scoring ability, whatever you want to call it. And so we're going to talk about that. Adam Vogue, who is like what do you want to call him? The statistics guy. Like he's our like resident like numbers dude that helps us understand players and what qualities they have. He had a nice piece that he did about XG, and so we'll kind of go through that a little bit and figure out how we're going to analyze it, because you can look at it a couple of different ways. Arsenal are lacking goals, so this resurgence and our what we've done so far is kind of like a false dawn because we really don't score goals. Or you can look at it as, if we're this good without having real goal threat the way people think, then how good will we be when we put those pieces together? And then George is here with me, and he has not gotten a chance on this channel to kind of talk about how he's felt about the Liverpool game. So we'll get his take on it, as well as the midfield. We've been having tons of conversations around midfield profiles, Thomas Partey, and that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that and a little bit about strikers. But before we get started, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll bring in George now. Hey, George.
Hey there, how are you?
Good. Let's make each other big. Yeah, let's get in there. Let's get in there. But yeah, so long time no talk. It's probably just been like a week, but feels like a long time since we've spoken, and quite a bit has happened already since the last time we've spoken. Glad you got your coffee there. It's gonna be a it's gonna be a
It's gonna
all
be
around.
a long one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably gonna be a long one, but yeah, a little bit of therapy, a little bit of I just think a calming kind of like, let's just get back into perspective and look at things from a holistic. I mean, micro level, losing to Liverpool 4-0 is catastrophic. I mean, it's not anything that you want to sit there and say it doesn't matter. I think a lot of us kind of said that we felt like we would be competitive, and I would say that you can probably say that we weren't, for the majority of the match. There was a piece of the match where we felt like we were a little bit in there, but ultimately we crumbled. And so from a micro level, it doesn't feel good to know that we just can't compete with certain teams. But holistically, when you look at it macro, we're still, because of what we were able to do against the smaller teams, losing to Liverpool, even at that point, we're still in fifth place within 3 points of fourth, and going into a game against one of the worst teams in the league, where West Ham is going to play against Man City and Manchester United is going to play against Chelsea. So depending on those results, we could be in a really good place. So not everything is bad, but we also have to make sure that we keep it in perspective that losing 4-0 is not good. But for you, when you watch the game, were you surprised at how uncompetitive we really were? And how good are Liverpool? I mean, did it not show? For me, the biggest thing was the levels in difference. So how did you feel when you watched the game? Were you surprised about the uncompetitiveness and the difference in levels of Arsenal and Liverpool?
Unfortunately, no. Like you can go back on my podcast, and I was surrounded. Like I was the most negative one. I actually went into this game saying expect a loss, 100%. And I think the reason that there was such a big outlash or outcry of people, I think, is because most people didn't feel that way. They thought that there was an opportunity to really be competitive. And I, on my entire podcast, tried to spend 40 minutes defending. Listen, when you have a young team like this, and I have ways that we can hurt Liverpool. I definitely believe that there was ways that we could have, done a lot better. And we spent time dissecting the tactical reasons about how we could hurt Liverpool. But fundamentally, when you have such a young team like this, without their first choice midfielder and without Kieran Tierney, who for me, there was a level of experience that even if you had them there, I still don't think we could have competed with Liverpool, because there's still such a gap in terms of the quality of these teams that, we really need to address. And that's okay. Like for me, when you look at it, Anfield is the cauldron of, in terms of experience that you need. If you really look back at it, Anfield has a record too. Forget the fact that it's just Arsenal who haven't won there in 8 years since 2012. But, top six teams don't win at Anfield, period. If you go back, they have an immense record at home. And in order to do that, we had to be at our very, very best, and Liverpool had to be at their very, very worst. And that's just a really weird hypocrisy for me to say, oh, we're going to be competitive in. And so it all came down a little bit to expectations. And I kind of drew a little bit of hearkening to one of your older posts about what's the difference between expectations, realism, and kind of drawing that bridge about what we should accept as fans, because I think when people say there's a throwaway, it really it leads to some connotations that people aren't comfortable with. And I think that mix of expectations though really was the difference from the outcry that I saw, because I'll be honest with you, Jess, I took a look at this and I thought, oh God, we're in trouble, because the Liverpool that we will face is not West Ham Liverpool. This connotation that, Klopp doesn't get up for big games, and don't make a mistake about it, he fears Arsenal and he does believe that we're a big team. The way that Liverpool perform against
Yeah.
top six rivals is really unmatched, bar maybe City. Like, their consistency, if you look at their results, is just absolutely immense. And that's not a coincidence. And so for
Yeah.
me, it comes back to really understanding, they've got Fabinho back, Thiago, like this idea Liverpool were struggling. I mean, they had a lot of their first choice players back across their spine against the top six rival at home. Like, I don't know, the leaps that people were making, in my opinion, were just unrealistic leaps for this Arsenal, where we are at this project and time point. So for me, that's why I saw the distance. In terms of the game specifically, I think you could really split it into a bookmark of the first 35 minutes and then beyond. And so, in terms of how you might want to look at it, maybe in the chasm of our projection, once again, you don't achieve top four by, beating Liverpool at Anfield and showing consistency against. There's been a lot of discussions about what that barometer should look like, what should we should take away, and I just really struggle that you're looking at one game of isolation compared to 10 games of sample, which consistency against teams outside the top six gets you top four. I know it's not what people want to hear. And I kind of said in my podcast, while it's a dagger to the heart of pride, it really doesn't move the bus on the path that we're on. And so,
Yeah.
it really needs to come back to that point where you don't like to see what we did, but factually, are we at the level that we should be expecting a competition with Liverpool at Anfield? Not for me. I think it's just very unrealistic. And then if you're going to have those expectations and we fall short against a young team, by the way, like, what were the big things that you look at this game that derailed? It wasn't just individual mistakes. It was experience in the middle of the park. We just weren't there, and that cut off our supply line. And that's literally the description of a young team. Like, when we went into this season, I don't think people realized you have the youngest team in the Prem. What does that mean? Look, guys, it would mean that you have inconsistency in terms of their final action. And, that will happen against one of the best teams in the country. And so for me, I very much expected this kind of result. I did think, we would score. I didn't think it would be that much of a snowball. But again, at the same token, if you told me, hey, this young team's going to be inconsistent and, they got battered and then it went down in a snowball, I don't think much people would be surprised that would be a game you would see throughout the season. I'm just glad it was against a team that we really shouldn't be expected to win against. It wasn't Brighton. Like, I would have been a lot more, not even just Brighton, but like Burnley or somebody in that vein. I would have been a lot more shell shocked that performance came from a team against them, not really Liverpool at Anfield, who, again,
That
it's
were they were knocking on the door for some sort of response from not really. I mean, when people were saying like, okay, well, Brentford got results, Brighton got results, West Ham got results. It's not only just the fact that, like, I do agree with you that big teams get up for other big teams. And I remember when we beat them, even when they were on the beach, a couple of years ago,
yeah.
and then we beat them again in the Community Shield. He was rattled. Like, Klopp was rattled, and then the
Mhm.
next time we played them, he was like, "No, you're gonna slap them," because he does have that competitive nature. But I think there's the aspect of, like, Arsenal. is different than Brighton. You know, they will click off against Brighton, but not against us. Like, we're one
Mm.
of the bigger teams. But there's also this aspect of comparing results when not looking at matchups, not looking that I think Brentford and West Ham were at home when they played them. I don't even think that they did not have to play against Thiago and Fabinho. We did. It's different. You know, there's a big difference there. And so, and I think some teams match up better to other teams. We're a possession type team. And I think we haven't found a solution to being pressed just yet. So it's kind of like you just have to take the rough with the smooth there. But what's the difference for you in, because you know there's this, oh well, Arsenal have always crumbled like this, they crumble all the time. What's the difference between this young team crumbling against Liverpool and teams of old that we can't really look back on and really give them any, and we're talking about teams that had Granit Xhaka and Ozil and Mustafi and these guys crumbling. Isn't there a slight difference between our young team doing it and those guys? We have to give them a little bit more grace, because I mean, it's not the same, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, you look at Tomiyasu, he's 23 and it's his third season in a competitive, adult football league. That's not the Serie A. It's his first season in the Prem. Like, a lot of these players we addressed roughly 4 to 5 starting positions. And, if you're going to assume complete perfection from the moment that they get inducted together as a team, I find it a little bit ridiculous. But as a whole, just to look at teams of the past, because I did kind of talk about this before, where we almost swapped philosophy. So those old teams had technicians to the max, but no defense.
Mhm.
It was still an incomplete team, but it was in the opposite thing. Now we have a complete defense because that's what we've addressed, but we don't have the functioning attack. And so, regardless of how you
Hold on, keep
slice that
talking.
lemon,
Keep talking.
yeah, regardless how you slice that lemon, it's an imbalanced squad against a balanced squad. And so, when you have that disparity, it's going to lead to the potential to really go down a rabbit hole of being beat quite comprehensively. I think for me, when you really look at this game, you're going to have a bookmark between the first 35 minutes and what's happened beyond. And I think those first 35 minutes is what give me a lot of hope about what we can do in the future with a more complete squad after being able to address the midfield and attack, which just factually we haven't done in a recruitment sense. And so, shock, horror, those were the things that we struggled against Liverpool. But the one thing that I really liked is the level of recruitment that we did. We really thrived against in the first 35 minutes. I know nuance is really not tolerated. It kind of depends on results for yourself. But, I made the point on Twitter that, in the first 35 minutes, we were actually immaculate in the buildup. We were excellent in the buildup, but our disorganized press and kind of inexperience in the middle third and poor decision making there really just stunted attacks. It staved it of really any ability to kind of get out. There was no reliable outlets, and it made kind of you sustaining pressure pretty much impossible. And, I think this is a great example of what we're talking about in the first 35 minutes. That, by the way, didn't just happen once. It happened so many times. I don't know, Jess, did you get a chance to watch back? And did you feel similarly on
Oh yeah,
rewatching?
like I rewatched the game always, but like it took me a little bit longer to rewatch it because I was like, wow, like I can't stomach
Mad,
it.
yeah.
But it took me 2 different times to rewatch it. But the first time that I watched it, obviously I was just so scared that we're gonna give up that first goal that
Yeah.
I didn't clock it, that we were okay. Like we were okay
We
up
were more than
until,
okay. We were very
yeah,
competitive. And,
we were
Ramsdale for
fine.
me was ballsy as hell. Like, I wanted to single out Ramsdale because when you think about it, this was his most important game. And so, like, when you're trying to draw tidbits from why is this team different, like how you asked me before, Jess, like for Ramsdale, we had a recruit who's one of our emerging defensive leaders play in probably his most high stakes scenario, have his best game in the shirt. What does that say to you about that kind of person? What does that say to you about really his ability to respond to adversaries and consequences? And I think he did amazing. He was our man of the match. I don't know about yourself, but like he was our best player by a country mile. And a big reason was this buildup that he was doing, and he was just finding
Yeah,
players in the middle of the park time and
do you
time
want me to
again.
press
And
play?
yeah, and I mean, so when you look at this is extremely patient buildup, and people are saying, Liverpool pressed us off the park. We were unfazed in the first part of the pitch, which is third, and what Lacazette does. So if you can pause this,
Mhm.
essentially what we lacked here in Lacazette as an outball there was the kind of the athletic ability to really burst into space. Took him an extra time to find his touch, and by that point, Liverpool have bodies behind the ball, and you basically shunt it out to Bukayo Saka on the touchline with no support because Laka now doesn't have the legs to burst past Mane here and Thiago into that space. Because if you see, just that's the hole. That's where we
Look how
need
far
it.
the next person is. Look how far, like
Yes,
Aubameyang is so far. Emil is way over there. Tomiyasu, like really, if somebody is making that darting run through, like you said, right in between, I think
it's
that's
huge.
Tsimikas and whoever that is, Van Dijk.
Van Dijk.
I mean, come on, like we're in on goal.
And that, but
We're in on
that's the
goal.
difference between the small margins, Jess, about like you when you ask like why didn't it work. So if Laka doesn't have the ability to do that, yeah, as this video lovely does, by the way, at Watman AFC, who's just an excellent person to
Awesome,
follow, who
yeah.
does these graphics. Tommy Yasu should be the one that overlaps to provide that option, just to give him somebody there. But again, look at Lacazette. Unfortunately, I don't want to hammer him, but he's wrong here. He's already moving away from the play, Jess. Like even if Tommy Yasu was to
Mm,
provide an overlap, Laka has to get in that hole and provide himself and make himself available to be an option. And that was
mm,
our problem during the entirety of the match. Forget just the first 35 minutes, but we lacked people in the middle third that were brave enough to find themselves between the lines and not just find themselves, but make themselves an option and then actually control it. Because again, Saka's 1v1 versus Tsimikas right there. And, he wins that race 9 times out of 10. So if you're not available in there, you can't break out. Again, it's 4 against 2 in that scenario.
mm,
And, essentially the chance is gone. And that's where we'll draw maybe, issues with our XG. And when you look at chance creation, like these are the things that context doesn't show you. I mean, here, if we make better decisions in the middle third, we have somebody that's athletically able to exploit that space that isn't Laka in that scenario. We basically have a 1v1 and boom, we're in on goal and you're in a very high, good quality chance. And so that's really the big difference. And I don't know if Odegaard is going to make that athletic burst here either. Like this scenario we've seen, like if you're looking at what we need in the middle of the park, right now people are looking at the fact that we didn't score from this scenario. But in my opinion, it's the midfield that's the problem. You have somebody there. We have the one-on-one with Bukayo and
yeah.
he's able to be in on goal. That's the numerical overload. So when people critique no goals, this is what I mean where the midfield is the issue, and it was the issue all night. We'll definitely go into like another clip where the counter press was just horrific off the ball, but this is an example in possession what we need as a team. Like what's the
Well,
evolution of
this
this
is
team
this is why we needed to see this particular system because we're
here?
probably
Yeah.
until and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but for me, until Thomas Partey leaves, we're going to play with probably most likely some form of a double pivot. So
For
I
sure.
believe both players, like where Lakanga and Thomas Partey are primarily, that's what they're going to be doing. So the most important players are going to be the person that plays in Lacazette's position, and the person in Aubameyang, and probably even Tomiyasu. Like those players that are going to be playing in and around Emil Smith Rowe and Bukayo Saka need to be different, and
Mm-hmm.
especially the number 10. This is where you would probably want somebody a little bit more athletic, a little bit more brave, that's going to shoot through, like have that Ramsey effect that people are looking for. And maybe this is an opportunity to move. If you think if Lacazette is Emil Smith Rowe and
There
we
we
have
go.
another left wing, Emil makes that run. And because
Mm-hmm.
Emil and Bukayo play so well together, I actually don't like when they're far away from each other because
Same.
I feel like they're the only two that can play that way. 1-2 touches in tight space. They're the only two who can really
Who
do
you
it,
described though
really.
that would allow us to do that? Husamawar. Like this is
Yeah.
why like I want somebody like that because look, the left wing is always going to be a twin 10. Like this is a twin 10 system. Like when you look at I know Laka's a striker, but guys, he's a 10. Like this is
Mm.
how we're trying to use him in this team. And when people say he suits more than Oba, not really. It's more that he's performing a role in midfield right now, and that's what you're seeing. But we need to replace that without losing what Emil gives us on the opposite side. And really, when you look at it, Emil in this position, it's right. It's what you said, Jess. Like he would absolutely make the right decision, closer to Bukayo. You would end up not having that problem. And by the way, Tomiyasu would be able to stay back if you really wanted to keep an inverted right back for that system because you're
Mhm.
afraid on the counter. Like that's what the benefits of having just an extra aggressive body in the middle would do to help us win these duels. And I think there are issues behind this setup, but I thought this clip was very interesting because it basically
Mhm.
addresses the chance creation concerns that we have. Some other things with Oba, I think he should be making a run in between the center backs, but again, it's the play is too far away right now. As a coach, I actually think Oba's in a great starting position right now. We coach these players to kind of make banana runs at this point. And so if play was to progress in the final third, because right now it's still in the middle third, it's not in the final third. Like
Mhm.
if Bakayo had gotten that 1v1, that's when I would guarantee you Oba's making a run in between
Mhm.
those center backs. Right now, if he makes it, it's too early. It's too telegraphed. You can't ask him to do that right now. And the big thing is look at Emil. He's wide open. And so Oba doing that run creates the space for Emil back post like that. And that's our cutback. Like when you ask about
Yeah.
chance, like that's what we do. So play this out how you would ideally see it. And that's what you need to see for the future of this team. And look, there was that athletic article, remember, that says which teams play in the half spaces the most. And shock horror, it's City, Liverpool, and yep,
I
us.
I I pulled that up as well. Let's go to the next clip, and
Yeah.
then we can also talk about half spaces a little bit as well and how we can utilize those better. But I'm just gonna press play here. I know,
Yeah,
like,
and just to run it out, and look, that's what bar
mhm.
Nuno and Lakanga, but I just think that this buildup was lost on a lot of people. If you're looking at positives, Jess, about what you can take away, we played out against the best pressing team with ease the first phase. Now we just need a little bit more in midfield to carry out these
Of
final
course.
actions.
I think if this is a meal, we have a different
We have a
something
different ball
different
game.
happening. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too, but it's if there's the important thing is that we need to be able to take something from it, and it may not be a positive, but it's something
Mm.
that it's a data point. You know, if people don't, because I know it's like a positive from a 4-0 drubbing, it's a data point to show what players are still needed because let's have it right. We're still I saw people saying we've spent money, so we should be able to compete with Liverpool more. I think that's a little bit reductive and a little bit simplistic. We have
Yeah.
spent money. But when you watch this, Liverpool's team is complete. We've spent money, but can you actually see that like our team is incomplete? We have not really even this midfield and up top needs surgery. It needs surgery. We need backups. Like we're nowhere near, but we definitely can look at this and say this is a data point. We know what we need to do going forward, but there's
You know what
about
it is,
50. Oh, go
Jess?
ahead. Go ahead.
It's a big debate about what type of striker people want because people there's this huge debate that people believe a false nine or somebody dropping in the hole, quote unquote, is what this team needs. And I'm hoping to show with this, it's not necessarily one person. Even if you have one person there, they're outnumbered by 4-2. Fundamentally, we just need better ball security in the final third. That's one thing, but we also need better transition control in midfield, and that's a Thomas Partey partner, and that's a separate issue. But when you look at kind of the next clip, which we'll talk about the counter press, it addresses this idea that even if you had an outlet there, you're not really looking at much difference in terms of where we failed. We failed getting our foot on the ball, and if you want to impose play on a team and be a possession based team for a lot of these things, you don't really play with an outlet. The best teams don't. Liverpool and City, they don't. And that's the thing. Now, if you want to be a counterattack team, then sure, I see the logic, but then understand that you're going to be soaking up pressure. It's a very different style of play. You're looking much more at deep blocks, mid blocks, and looking to exploit on the counter, but it's not the only way to win. It's not the only way to get goals. Another way is to do this twin 10 system that we've seen pockets of. It's just incomplete. And the reason tactically I prefer this system than the other one is when you look at a striker that drops in, it becomes very easy tactically to limit him. If there's only
Mhm.
one player that's dropping in as a supply line to help your attack, you draw out center backs and your markers, but it's only one person. So as a coach, all I have to do is surround him and boom, your attack is kind of staved. But if you start to have two players that can do that, that becomes a lot more difficult to contain because now there's two areas of the pitch that I have to make sure I've got markers in, but that drags two different lines out of position. Whereas the false
Mhm.
nine just drags one line. that's tactically what you're doing. Now, that doesn't mean that it's shit and you should never use it, yada yada. But for me, it's a plan B game state want, but not a necessity for a plan A. And those are just some things that we might have to look at for the attack about what we want in the future, because those are very different types of strikers, right? And
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you want a striker that does both, but those are like very, very rare. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
very difficult to find somebody that's that well-rounded, but I think this is because so Yo-Yo is basically saying wasn't the issue last season build up. The
Mhm.
manager director chose Xhaka Party Sambi, and I think this is why that midfield conversation is always going to be top of mind is because
Yeah,
we missed a trick in the summer to fix this issue. But it's not just about what they didn't buy, it's that nobody envisioned Granit Xhaka being out.
no
Like
one did.
he hasn't Thomas and Xhaka have not really played together this season. And I believe that although midfield would not be perfect with those two,
Mm,
we definitely would have something more than what we do with Party and Sambi because that Party Sambi was brought in to be Party's replacement if Party gets injured. Nobody envisioned those two playing together. It's
start.
just a band-aid for now. So I
Yeah,
think they addressed it slightly, that if Thomas is out, we have somebody, but we know that there's levels to go up, but it's really about Xhaka being injured. I don't think you
yeah.
see this level of difficulty in the middle of the pitch with Granite there. You would still have issues. I know he's not perfect, but it wouldn't be to this level.
Yeah, and it's a conversation about Partey. In actuality, we need to have a conversation about who Thomas Partey is, because I still see, and I saw your stream with Harry, and I was screaming when you mentioned about who Thomas Partey is, because I constantly scream about who he is on this channel, and for me, that's the key to unlocking where this midfield can go, because there are huge gaps in midfield, and I don't think that the manager chose in the summer. I don't agree that an extra contract extension was, really stamping his authority. You're my guy for the next couple years. It's what you said, Jess. They felt, okay, here's a band-aid. I doubt Xhaka will ever get injured. So let's focus on fixing the build-up completely. Let's finish that project before we move on to really getting the midfield surgery, because Granit will never get injured. And then, shock, he did. So it kind of hurt us in that aspect. But again, the same way that there was a huge increase in chance creation from adding these build-up players at the beginning of this past 10-game run, I always assure you, add that defense with a plan A in Granite and Partey, you're going to see an uptick in terms of creation. And, it
Mhm.
won't be what we need because it's still incomplete. It still is. But you absolutely are going to see a lot more dominant possession stats, a lot more tempo control with Granite and
Our
Partey
possession
together.
has never been this low.
No.
Like what our possession has never been this low. Last season, it was way better, and I just think it's because Granite was there the entire time.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that he does have. So, when it's the two of them, it still won't be perfect. But again, our best midfield performance was against Spurs, and it was the two of them. So I think you could look at that and kind of be like, okay, there is a difference between having Sambi and Thomas and Xhaka and Thomas, but we are going to have a little bit more of a longer conversation about that at the end. I
Yeah.
do want to get through these clips.
Yeah, and I think, like, to set this up, this is the mid block. So this is the off the ball issue. So when I talked about, the middle third being the issue, this is once again the issue when you look at this clip. So look, Bukayo is going to go to press Virgil van Dijk, who's the pressing trigger, which is excellent. He blocks off the lane. And if you just pause here, because this is the issue. Again, I don't want to hammer him, but it is Lacazette. Like, that area of the pitch is the issue. That first ball into midfield was way too easy for Liverpool constantly.
Mm.
And that was the reason that we had to kind of stave off. Now, look, in reality, Bukayo is blocking the passing lane to the width. Okay, that's what he's doing right now, and he's forcing him back inside where the ball was received. Laka has to be next to, I think that's Thiago, who was open all game. Okay, and this is how really Liverpool got out with such ease. Now, people are highlighting here, the clip kind of looks at Partey, but if he presses in this scenario, he leaves a massive gap to Sambi, whom, by the way, he doesn't trust in the back to really deal with it. So right now, he's looking to go and see where Thiago's going, but he's not fully committing to him because that's Lacazette's job. And, when Lacazette isn't doing that, this 3-3 counter press was just a shambles. We played it against City. Chelsea, and it was a mess. There were so many gaps. And, Thiago, world class right there, straight into Jota, and they're out. And then now you've basically got him versus Sambi. And it's just a tough, tough ask. And those distances are way, way too big. And so when you're looking at it, whose fault is this? It's Lacazette again. Really, he's the guy that leaves his man open. That should be your guy, whether it's Odegaard, whatever the attacking mid. He's got to stop that ball inside, and that didn't happen. But the one funny thing I find really hilarious is when you look at Thiago. I've long said on this channel, Partey profiles like Thiago, and in order to let him thrive, who does Thiago have in that setup in order to be confident that he can do it? Well, it's Fabinho kind of in the back there doing his dirty work. And realistically, you need Thomas to receive from the first phase into that and have the freedom to step up into midfield. Here, he feels that if he counter presses, he's going to leave a big gap in the back that Sambi can't cover. And we all know that Sambi isn't great at covering space. Like, this is one of the absolute difficulties of having him in that position. And so I think that's also why I wanted Ainsley when we were first looking at the preview. I felt far better in duels, much better athletically to cover big distances. And I almost would assume, I don't know for sure, but I guarantee that Thomas would have felt a lot more comfortable stepping higher into midfield with more of a security in Ainsley in the back as compared to Sambi. And so when you do look at some of these faults in the middle third here and you're addressing whoever that attacking midfield or that spot, that person in that zone, we can debate, is it a striker, is it a midfielder, whatever it is, their job needs to stop that first pass into midfield. And when you look at Thomas Partey and what kind of profile he is, if you have him deeper, he's much more of a risky, progressive passer. Like Thiago, he likes to really penetrate, carry. You look at his statistics back even in La Liga, like those two profiled completely the exact same way. And in order to let them thrive, he can't be the first person picking up the pass from the center backs. He needs to receive it into midfield, and he wants to break. And he's just absolutely our best player about zone 14 entries. So when you look at the position that Thiago's in, Thomas Partey's excellent about feeding that ball, not just to Jota in that small space, but he gets it into the top of the D. And so if you're looking at how do I then complement Thomas, what partner, what do we need in midfield in order to do that? For me, you need a Thiago presence. And it goes back to what you said, Jess, to kind of in the summer. That's what we need to fix. And so for me, that's really the biggest issue that we have right now, because Thomas hasn't played well in this game. That's also on him personality wise. Like, he should be imposing himself a little bit more, but it also has to
I
do
don't
with the
know if he was
structure.
fit. I don't know if he was fit 100%. What do you?
He could not have been fit, but I mean, some of the things like those structure gaps shouldn't happen, if I'm really being honest with you. I mean, that Lacazette trigger, that's a breakdown in terms of, above. Somebody should be picking up Thiago and not allowing that pass in the center. And then beyond him, the gaps between him and Sambi were really, really big. You don't want to see that. You want to see Sambi a lot closer, the lines a lot closer. As soon as the gaps are that large, then it's kind of game over in that aspect.
And for, I guess, like, my whole thing about like Thomas is I know I feel like always like Captain Save Thomas Party always,
Yeah.
but the reality is that sometimes when I hear Arsenal fans talk about Thomas Party, I'm just like, this is why we don't deserve nice things. Like, it's just, we don't deserve nice things. I know that he's been underwhelming, but it's not because he's not a quality player.
Yeah.
It's his injuries are what they are. I mean, it's not like the club went out and bought an injury-prone player. This is somebody who had a relatively clean injury record before he came to Arsenal, and then he got the injuries. And he's never really, him and Xhaka haven't played a lot of games together. But not only that, the club is stalling on bringing him the person that's going to allow him to. We do this all the time. We do this all the time.
We don't
Like,
support our superstars. We never do it.
Yeah, it's 45 million that you went to Atletico with in a briefcase to bring this guy in. And I think about when Granite first came in, and I just can't believe, like, it took them 5 years to bring in an athletic box to box to support him.
Yeah.
Now we hate Granite and we want him out. Thomas is in his second year, and in the summer, we decided not to go ahead and get that midfielder. We decided to extend Xhaka. I get the reasons why, but Thomas only has a certain amount of prime age years left for us to take advantage of.
Yeah.
And so I know as much as people want to see a more technical, um, forward thinking midfielder come in order to get the most out of Thomas while we have him in his prime, we kind of need to bring a player in to support him. But not only that, that player supports moving into a midfield three in the future when Thomas is no longer a starter. So, from a short term and long term, I feel like it makes sense to just bring that person in, even though it's not the more flashy person that people are envisioning will help us score goals. I hear this like, we need a goal scoring midfielder. We need a goal scoring midfielder. We need somebody that allows Thomas to push up, and we need our forward players to get their shit together. That's what we need.
Well,
Like,
I think the things that we're highlighting here, Jess, so I use this analogy for a lot of people that are looking at output because I really think it's the wrong questions. Like, I would question a striker if we're getting great, good quality chances but not converting. That's a striker output issue right now for me. But we're not doing that. One of the most characteristic things of Arsenal, regardless of XG and what stats you use, which might be a good transition into that topic, is Arsenal are great at getting the ball in the final third. We just are. We consistently do that, no matter what metrics you want to use from whatever, the last 10 games, the last 5 games. We are good at that. The issue is turning that into good quality chances, even if we spend a lot of our time in the half spaces, which all the best teams do. So what is the issue? If we're doing a system that's very similar, to what the modern coaches are doing, if we're getting the ball into the final third, why isn't that happening into good quality chances? Well, I just think the margins that we've just highlighted in these two clips are the exact reason why. It isn't a striker dropping in that fixes Thomas being able to push up. It isn't a striker in that hole that's able to receive as deep as where Laka received it in the first clip from that first possession. Your striker isn't doing that. It's a midfield issue. And once you fix those, if then your striker is not converting chances because you're getting it in the final third and you're giving them a great thing, then yeah, sure, output's an issue. I can definitely get on board. But you know what? I don't believe that's the case. And I think that we do have very efficient forwards, in fact. And it's just that we don't create enough for them and we don't give them enough chances to show it. So, but a big thing with XG, I think, is looking at what XG means. And I don't know about you, Jess, but people seem to use these stats and these arguments online, and I don't know if they know what they mean.
well, let's let's
Exactly.
let's look at the graphic that was floating around. This came out like right after the Liverpool game. Again, I find
Yeah.
that very strange. Um, because yeah, we lost to Liverpool, but our issue really wasn't that we couldn't like it was
Yeah.
weird when it came out. You could have put this out during international break and it would have been the same, but this started to go around and all these graphics were coming around that we're just literally the worst attacking team in the league. And if you look out here, it's like XG4 for us. Like we're way down the pecking order here at 14.13,
Yeah.
XG against 19.77, XG difference is negative 5.64. So we're in and around teams that we don't want to be near. I just want to point out that Spurs is just right above us, so there you go. But the XG doesn't look great. But all in all, is XG the only way to determine whether or not your team is a good attacking team, George? Like, are we using it correctly? Are we using it as something to support an argument because we're like, okay, yeah, Arsenal lost a game, so like, pop, here we go. What do you think?
I think it matters about the interpretation. So what is XG? Like I think we need to simplify what it means because I really don't think people understand what XG is. But XG is purely the probability that you will score from a certain position on the pitch. It has nothing to do with how often that you make those chances. It has nothing to do with how you get there, where are you taking them. It's just purely shot location and where is the probability of you scoring from that. And the idea is you get there more often, the more likely you'll score. That's the theory for people saying, is XG able to talk about attacking performance and whatnot. So it has nothing to do with how you progress the ball, has nothing to do with any of those methods in the half spaces, the overloads. It has nothing to do with tactically about that. The thing that I use it for is it's kind of like an outcome measure, like goals scored. And it's a good kind of absolute value to look at some things, but it definitely doesn't tell the whole story. So, for example, if you do go into this, XG modeling and whatnot, a lot of it is conditioned on who we've lost against, which is Liverpool,
Mhm.
City, Chelsea, which in those teams, if you look at statistics, they're clear outliers. I mean, they're on their own, they account for something like, 4 or 3 XG per match, and that inside a 10 game sample, which is ridiculous. And then you remove them and we end up being kind of right by West Ham. And you don't want to ever remove data points, in terms of statistics, but when they're that large, it just factually is kind of influential to what you're looking at for trends, especially if you're looking at how can this performance sustain outside the top six? Is this an issue with the system itself, or is this an issue with players making decisions that are wrong? And that needs to
Yeah.
be kind of understood because those game states are very, very different. For example, Leicester, if you look at that's a really good example of context not being applied in XG because XGs were a lot more similar, but we took our foot off the gas. We had already scored. We had no reason in order to press
But
forward.
isn't like even Madison's shot, didn't that have a half point XG?
It did.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that shot that he took was a half point XG, which made it look like they were
Yep.
in better positions to score against us. I feel like people, it's like if people have shots, then that means against us, then that means like sometimes what we do is we allow people to come onto us, but we only allow them to shoot from places that have a low likelihood of going in. That doesn't mean anything, So when I look at that and I'm like, that shot that he took, which was great, was a half point XG. Most of the chances that they had, barring I think Luke Thomas's shot that went just wide,
Yeah.
were relatively not really anything that was too crazy. I know Ramsdale made some um some really good saves, but like, do you really think Leicester were the better team? Like that's my thing. It's like, so if their XG was higher, do you think when you look at ours being lower, do you think Leicester deserved to win? Honestly, like we were the better team.
Well, yeah, and I think when you look at also our unbeaten run in terms of that XG differential, I mean, Scott did a great piece in terms of showing how different it was to the Emery era. And I think the big
Yeah.
fear is are these negative XG trends that we're seeing right now similar to the Emery era unbeaten run? And how are those similarities or differences, right? And for me, they just really aren't the same, particularly when you look at us not having our first choice midfield. The same reason that I foresaw a likely uptick in creation from our buildup, and we saw it in those 10 games, like we did. I think you're going to see a very similar uptick in terms of our first choice midfield. If it has a chance to play kind of with our defense. And in the meantime, it's an incomplete project in midfield and attack. And so for me, the attack will struggle until we get some more additions there. And we kind of
Of
highlighted who
course.
we need in that area, whether that's Emil Smith Rowe, whether that's somebody else. Fundamentally, if you're getting the ball into the final third and you're not scoring, then that means you have an inefficient final action. And that's getting the difference between a chance and a good quality chance. It's not turning that good quality chance into a goal. Like people are making the
Yeah.
wrong inferences here. It's a step behind that we're
But
struggling with.
I'm here, but like, so I guess this is what confuses me is like, okay, so you see the numbers and they're not great.
Hmm.
But I think it's whether you think half glass full or half glass empty,
Hmm.
because some people are saying, well, that means we were just lucky to win those games. We were lucky to win those games. Whereas when I look at it, I think if we're one of the worst teams in attack, but we're in fifth, then when we do finish the project, because we were so incomplete, I don't know how anybody can look at this group and say
Yeah.
we have Lacazette playing in the 10 role. We have Aubameyang who is either not getting enough chances or a little bit like we just know this is not Aubameyang at his tip top. Like he's just kind of like right simmering right underneath. And then you have two kids that are going to be inconsistent without first choice midfield. So when you look at that and you're like, we're still in fifth. For me, I'm half glass full thinking, well, when we do get those players in and when it all clicks, think about how good we're going to be. Whereas some people are thinking, well, if Ramsdale had made that save or made that save, you guys would have been further down, down in the table. And I think it depends on where you kind of sit in terms of Arsenal and your overall ideas on things. But for me, I'm not saying that we're a great attacking team. The numbers don't lie. We're not a great attacking team, but we can get better. And I feel like that's always what's not there, is that like it's almost like, well, this is what we're going to be forever. Emil Smith Rowe and Saka are going to get better. We're going to bring in a striker. Hopefully, we bring in another attacker. We're going to bring in a central midfielder. So there's room to grow, but it's just weird to me how it's like it's almost like it's final, and
Well, I think the
it's
recruitment tells a
not.
story, Jess. Like we tried, like we know that we can get the ball to the final third, but we can't keep it in the final third. So like when you talk
Right.
about sustained pressure and stuff like that, you look at, your Willian, your Odegaard, like they chose players that, in theory were ball retention experts. I know Willian doesn't work out and he had a poor time, but like that was the theory of his profile. That's the theory of Odegaard. Like that's what they tried to do. It's just not working. And those weren't. I have my own preferences about who I'd like to see, and I'd like to see Emil a lot more central. I knew he would get into goal scoring form. This is no surprise to me about what kind of profile he is. But for me, we just need another option because you have to make a decision about where you want to go up top as well as in midfield. And those questions, in terms of can you keep the ball up there, but then can we control transitions well? Like can that counter press, which is that clip, by the way, that second clip, can we stop that effectively? That's the second part to sustaining pressure. That's how we put our foot on the ball in terms of the middle third. That's how we compete with the biggest teams in the league. They don't do a counter attack kind of model. They do really impose their play no matter who they are. And I think that kind of leads into a little bit of, should we have gone three at the back? Should we have done these differences for a specific game or an isolated game? And
Yeah.
I don't believe in it, really. I think that Arteta is basically saying, or whoever the manager is, like I would prefer them to stick to their philosophy, knowing that there's going to be some bumps in the road, and then build that out if that's how you want to play down the future. It makes no sense to me to basically say, for this one game, forget what you're learning, do this aspect just to get through this one game, but then we're going to go back to the old way after that. It confuses players about where the model is, where you're
Mhm.
supposed to be going. And for me, I would just rather get through these bumps, see the data points that we can improve on. And I think what we're getting to the point of is not only are we reliant on Granite, but the midfield is an issue. Like it's always been a big issue for me.
Yeah,
So
for sure. I
let's
don't think you
spend the
can look
money.
at it. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think there's any indication that we won't. So that's why I kind of am like,
Yeah.
I know that midfield signing is coming. I know that striker is coming. I know things will improve. So I'm not as worried about it. Of course, it's not great to see the numbers, but I just want to read a little bit of what Adam Vogt wrote, because I think that he made a lot of good points and he was quite fair. He said, kind of when you look at these numbers, in short, it's not good. After the fiasco at Anfield, Arsenal now sport a negative 0.51 expected goal differential per 90 minutes, essentially indicating that the average game consists of Arsenal's opponents creating a half goal more chances than the Gunners. That differential is 16th in the Premier League. Arsenal are 12th in expected goals and 17th in XG allowed. Here's what it looks like on a plotted chart. Obviously, we're not where we really want to be on this plotted chart. City and Liverpool running away with the Chelsea. The good teams are over here. We're
Mm,
somewhere down here. Not great. But he says so. A lot of that has to do with Manchester City, Liverpool, and Chelsea. And that's what you've already kind of said, George, that a
yeah.
lot of that is built up in those games where we really weren't there. Um, it was like a negative 2.6 of it is from Chelsea, another negative
Yeah. It was almost
3.7 from
three from each of
Chelsea.
those.
Yeah, negative 3.9 from Liverpool, which also means that Arsenal are +4 in their other 9 games. So it's 3 really ugly losses, and we can go back and forth about what, like, how uncompetitive we are. But when you take those out, you have to just, I mean, we're just not really where we want to be, and those games really skewed things quite a bit. Arsenal's XGA is made up of 52 about 52% by expected goals created by Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City. Those games really kind of mess this up quite a bit, you know. So, but I think the most important part is kind of what he said at the end. He said, if you're reading this and wondering how to feel, here's a little mental experiment for you. Would you rather be higher on the table than where your XG says you should be, or would you rather be last season's Brighton, a top club by XG, but lower mid table, something to think about. So it's one of those where I kind of sit in that space of like, we definitely need to improve, but we're in fifth, and so there's opportunities to improve. So like, should we be panicking, you
Well,
know?
I think it's because people just don't understand statistics. I'll be honest with you. I deal with this every day in my life, in terms of what I do at work, myself. I think the idea of an outlier, and when you look at trends, when do you remove data points? When is something,
Mhm.
not part of the trend that doesn't help you? When is that number giving you too much variance? But in simple terms, you're not facing Chelsea, Man City, and Liverpool pretty much throughout the season. So the idea that we're +4 on teams outside the top six gives me immense credit, because if you want to really get nitpicky about trends, you can say, look, overall the attacking is not great, so I wonder if the attack will be great for the whole of the season. But if you look at it, we're excellent in terms of teams outside the top six, and being +4 is immense. It's actually really, really good. So that would mean, in theory, that if that trend continues with teams outside the top six, and we keep getting really, really poor XG against the top six clubs, which again, it's not. It's really the best three teams in the country. But if you continue those trends, then in theory we would be excellent against those teams outside the top three. So it really
Yeah.
depends on how you want to project things. And I just think when you look at those XG tables, it's hurt without Granite. You basically have an entire 10 game sample of this 12 games, where Granite isn't involved. And he's a huge player to this midfield. He's a huge player to progression and putting your foot on the ball. So you condition, you don't throw out the stats. I think that's also very, very fair for people to be concerned with, when you look at it. I just want people to understand, how do you fix those problems? Because it's not just that, we're poor in a system sense, because a lot of people are doing the same things. If I felt that it was just the manager or the structure, I would say, okay, let's do something different, and let's look at the most successful teams in the country. Let's look at their examples.
Okay,
Like,
I have some. Okay, so let me pull up the thingy. Let me pull
yeah.
up the graphic. But then I also, now that you said that, I do have some questions based on some things that I've seen. So let's look at
Yeah.
the graphic first about half spaces. And somebody had a question about why can't Emil play in the right half space? I don't know if you have an answer for that, but
Yeah.
essentially this just shows that the Big Six and Southampton use the half spaces more. So we're not attacking differently than anybody else. We're right up there with everybody else. Like, we're third in there at using the half spaces, just like the teams
Yeah.
that we want to be like. The only difference is that I think we really struggle in our final action and we don't get there enough. Is that fair
Yeah.
to say?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it looks like look, if something's not working, you basically look around at what is. I think that's a very fair. People can look at that, outside. And if we were down by the bottom, I would say, you know what? Okay, we should really start using the half spaces more, because the most successful teams are doing it. And basically, our systems are really quite similar. If you look at how Man City and Liverpool play, how we attack with 5 channels, and how Arteta sets us up, it's very, very similar. But what's the disconnect? Why are these teams excellent in XG and Arsenal aren't? For me, it's got to go down to quality. Like, if we're using the spaces that the best teams are doing, and we have the structure that the best teams are doing, and we're still not getting there, it becomes, is it structure or is it a quality issue? And there's a huge quality issue for me in attack and midfield. And again, I don't know why this is a surprise. We didn't address it in summer. Like, that wasn't the point of it. And so I end up speaking in circles on this, Jess, where it's like, I don't know what people realistically expected for how much improvement you can have without kind of addressing those areas. And I think everybody has their own subjective ideas about how you can fix these problems. Some people still would like a striker. Some people would still like a midfield. Some people would like a winger, a creative winger. In terms of Emil in that right half space, just really quickly, I mean, that's where
Mhm.
Emil grew up. He actually prefers the right half space. I don't know what people actually see, because at Huddersfield, that's where he was at. And even in the academy, that's where he prefers to operate in. The reason we have him on the left is because we have two players right now that we bought. We bought Martin Odegaard and Lacazette, who are trying to function in that area. If Emile goes there, we don't have another person that's technically able to progress us up the midfield in that area. We don't have somebody reliable in that area of the pitch that can move us forward. Odegaard tried that at Burnley. It was poor. Like it wasn't really something that worked out. We don't have an option there, so we put Emile there, and he's
Mhm.
just a great player, so he's going to do well there. But ideally, you have Emile in the center or Emile left wing, whatever you want. But you have two people doing what Emile's doing for us, not one. And that's really the idea behind it. And I do think that they've made the wrong choice in Martin Odegaard. I don't agree with that. I have my own opinions on that
Mhm.
signing, but that was the reason why Emile wasn't put in the center, because evidently that was chosen. And we have Lacazette as well, who all prefer the right. You have too many players in the squad that prefer the
Yeah,
right.
and it's a weird one because it's kind of like Odegaard so quickly is shunted out of the team because
Hmm.
of his physicality. It's so clear that
Yeah.
we brought in Lacazette because he's more physical, and Odegaard really just can't hack it. He really needs to increase that physicality, and I don't know if there's a
I don't know if he can. Everyone makes
yeah,
fun of me for
that's
my thing. It's the
but
five
that's
yard
what I'm saying,
burst,
like,
but
I don't really know, like, if there's any real, thing,
hmm,
but if the team is better around him, I think he'll be okay, but I worry about him because I'm just like, the Premier League is so fast and so strong, and we just saw that the number 10 that we would ideally need in situations like that needs to be able to run through space, and he doesn't really have that, so it'd be interesting to see what happens with him, but my question is, earlier in the show that I did, there was we were talking about Martinelli, and then
hmm.
inevitably, when you talk about Martinelli, you start talking about Pepe. Every single time you lose a game, the players that didn't play were the solutions to that.
Yeah.
But, there's Saka and ESR are not killers, and we need to get our killers onto the pitch. Is it is there something with Arteta not using our more goal thready type players like Martinelli and Pepe that's an issue? Because ESR and Saka are not looked at as goal scorers at the moment, but without them, we really struggle, really. But then you have Martinelli and Pepe who are better goal scorers, but they're not being used. What is your take on like put more of the goal scorers on the pitch and the goals will come when we've kind of already seen that when they do play, they don't really help us as much either, so because we have 4 players that can play off of those wings, and Arteta prefers Saka and ESR. Martinelli and Pepe are on the outskirts. I mean, is there a better way to use them? Is there a better balance, or what is your take on that?
Um, it depends on what kind of team that you want to be, right? Like if you're wanting to be a possession based team, it makes no uh, loose logic that they want half space players in the half spaces. Like Martinelli and Pepe aren't that. And so you're basically asking them to do a job that they aren't built for, regardless of what I feel on the quality of them. I don't even want to talk about quality quite yet, because that logic doesn't make sense to me. Like, no one would assume that's the role that they need to take. In terms of putting more output players kind of on the pitch and just let them figure it out, there's this great graphic on Twitter that I've seen where a lot of football Twitter people believe that you get the ball from one area of the pitch to the other. There's a bunch of squiggly lines about how you get there, and it just magically happens. But once you're there, you're going to score goals. That stuff is important, especially at this level of the game, and especially at this level of pressing in the game. You mentioned, Jess, that we struggle with teams that like to press us, and what's the next part of this team, because we do well against teams that don't. Well, adding goal scorers isn't going to help you get through those actions, and those solutions are ball carrying kind of progressors that can go up and down the pitch at ease with athleticism. That's what beats your press. That's what allows you to kind of get out of these things. When you look at the buildup, we had a great example of what a world class press does and how we can move around that, right? And then you've got the Lacazette, which is like, okay, that next part, we need you to explode, get into that space, give it to Saka and create an overload. We can't. and then the attack breaks down, and then boom, that chance, that 1v1 is gone. And stats basically show that's a 0.01 xg. Like, when you look at the story about what's the issue there, was it a striker offering himself deep at the top of the circle? Was that the issue? Not really. We
Mm,
couldn't get the ball from that second phase up quick enough. And this is again against the best teams in the country, because when we're really good, we do that pretty well. And that's just because of the quality difference. Like, when you have a quality difference against other teams, they'll let you do that. And we can get by, but it's not great. It's not ideal. And so, just realistically, Jess, it's that age old question: is it quality or is it system? And I keep going back that, I'm seeing things that the best teams in the country are doing. And I have quality concerns about the players that we employ right now in midfield and in attack, too, to be fair, but really in midfield. And I'm just a big midfield engine kind of guy. And I think if we can outrun those presses, we're going to get into the spaces that we want to a lot more frequently, but we can also keep the ball there. That's the key decision making for me. And then afterwards, when you look about output, those are nitpicky things. Like, there's always going to be strikers. We have the goal scorers, as people say, in Martinelli and Pepe. Like, if we can get the ball to those players, people will score goals. Like, that really isn't the issue for me. So if we're not able to do that with good enough chances or enough, that's the first problem I need to see fixed. And so
yeah.
I'm patiently waiting. I think Granite coming back will tell us a lot. Again, I predicted before this run that a really good defense is going to increase our chance creation. I have another prediction: like, you add these two together, we're going to see a difference in these XGs. Now, I'm not going to flip and say, oh my God, it's because of Granite, which I'm fearing that's going to be the conclusion that people are making. It's
Mhm.
just, I'm very, very cognizant about where the issues are, and they are in midfield for me. It's so stark. That's the biggest difference between everybody else. You even look at West Ham, Jess, that have these great outlets that everybody wants. What's the big difference? It's they've got Rice and Suchek, these like dominant, pivot areas that are able to control transitions, and they can
Yeah.
allow them to keep the ball in the final third. So it's like, if we don't have that, it becomes very tough to compete. So I'm
Yeah,
not
for sure.
worried as a worrying trend, and I'm patient that that's the next part of the development. And to be fair, look, in Jan, if we don't get Awar, I'm gonna cry, but also I want to see, like, what's the next move of this,
Yeah.
because that's the attack in midfield that I think a lot of us have subjective feelings about where we want to go. But to be honest, we haven't really had an inkling. Like,
But I wanna that's what I wanna ask you though, because, um, when we were talking about midfield yesterday, there
mm,
was a lot of people that said, "We have not replaced Carzola." Tons of comments like that. First of all, Carzola, like many other Arsenal players, you're not gonna ever see another player like that in your whole life. They were
yeah,
one of a kind. They were really special. We'll never replicate it. There'll never be another Thierry Henry. I don't care how good Mbappe is, you're not gonna see it.
yeah,
Robin van Persie, very special. You're never gonna see another striker like that can play like a 10, but also has a dagger of a left foot. You're never gonna see that again. You're never gonna see a Santee. But do you think there's some credence there that there is something in between a 10 and a deep line playmaker that we kind of need to have in our team? Because Granit is like a deep lying defensive guy. I don't really want to see that ever again. But Santi also, like, he had the ability to do things from deep, but he also had the ability to like progress and beat a man a little bit and be a little bit further in into the offense as well. Is that player also missing in our arsenal, because we don't really have anybody like that either?
um, so one of my favorite phrases on this channel is, we need ball carrying progressors that are elite over 5 yards,
Mhm.
that are versatile, and that that can extend play into the next 15 yards. What was Santi? He was that. He was the release valve player. And I believe we need an additional one in absolutely every single one of the thirds of the pitch. We need one in defense, we need one in the middle, and we need one up top. And for me, until you get that in each third of the pitch, we won't be complete. I do think without a right back that overlaps, we don't overload the right as much. Our right wing is, on an island a lot of times. I would like to fix that. I'd like the opportunity to attack with both sides. So that is an issue. That is a little bit of a recruitment issue. We do need somebody that gives us that option. But when you look at Santi, I call him like the release valve. You basically gave it to him, and he solved your problems. They were inopportune, by the way. Like the structure wasn't good when he received them, but he was so good that he was able to say, "Screw it, I'll take it, and I'll get you out of trouble." And we need more players like that. When in this day and age, when you look at jugo de posición, like that's the positional rotations that everyone
Mhm.
calls the fancy terms. How do you break teams that are so good in structure, Jess, that don't give you the space? You need the ball carriers. You need the people that will draw them out of those positions and break those spaces. And that's what Santi was. So for me, it's not so much having a deep lying playmaker, but it's having a player capable of doing that. And for me, I think we have a great one. His name's Thomas Partey. It's just, you can't keep him deep and don't have somebody to support him. Santi had Coquelin. Partnerships do matter in order to thrive. And while individual players can be world class on their day and on their level, a big reason that Santi was able to really perform that way was because of Coquelin and some of the dirty work that he did. And so you do need partnerships to thrive. I just think adding a ball carrying progressor in every third of the pitch is going to be the answer for yourself in terms of, is that what we need? I don't know if the profile is exactly what we need. I think whenever you get into those debates, it really depends for me on who is Partey. That's where I go back to essentially. Like, does Partey work with Santi? It can, sure. Does it get the best out of Thomas? Probably not, but it will work. And is that the bet that you want to make again? Like, are you then making the exact same issue that we've made for years about not supporting your world class players when they need it, not making use of their primes? And that's a frustration that I'm really not wanting to have. I think there's examples of every kind of profile that work. Yeah, so like I know most people on here know I'm not a deep lying playmaker guy, but I'm not naive to think that there's never been a successful deep lying playmaker. I'm really okay with whatever you'd like to choose, but make sure that you pick people that are complementary. And the issue then becomes I just don't think a deep lying playmaker is complementary to Partey unless he can run. Unless you're like a Bubakari Samare who has high progression numbers but can run. Like, and those
Mhm.
players are very, very rare. Those combo players are extremely, extremely rare. So it depends. It really does depend. I think when you look at Renato Sanchez, your Bruno Guimaraes, who people absolutely love, that type of player is so different to say a Basuma, to say
Yeah, of course.
a Fabinho, those types, like they're very, very different. So the first question we need to ask, who do we want to be in midfield? Like what's our identity that we want to be like? And if you want to support Thomas Partey the best he can, that leads to a much more Fabinho type of player. If you want a slightly different area where you want that Cazorla type, that more technical person, then just know like Thomas won't look great. And then in my opinion, I would be like, well, why don't you just find somebody that can do that with the technical midfielder then? Like it makes the signing of Partey very redundant for me.
Well, that's what's gonna be interesting to see what the club does, because
Yeah.
that's what I was saying earlier is we really don't know. Like you were saying earlier, there were light links to Basuma, some weirdish links to
Yeah.
Neves. We don't really know what's gonna happen, but this next midfield signing, which to me is more important than the striker signing, like that midfield signing for me is gonna tell me exactly what direction we're going in and
Yeah.
what I'm gonna be looking at for the next couple of years. So if we end up with something that I, personally, I feel like if we do anything other than a CDM, I think I will have a mini breakdown. I think I will because I just don't I wouldn't be able to understand it. It wouldn't make sense to me. I'd be like, okay, well, you need to bring in something else because Thomas is dead, but
I think you're going to be disappointed only because Shaka's going to return, and I think the club sees that as enough of a band-aid. And I wonder what's available in January that is that
mm,
perfect partner available. I'm not too sure. I would probably stave off like the pitchforks if they felt, hey, in the summer we can get somebody better for that role. That's something I would understand, and it's why I'm so keen
mm,
on Awar. For me, he's the band-aid that fixes so many injuries in terms of the squad. He can play deeper. He can play that Burnley role that Odegaard was asked to do way, way better. He can play a lot higher up. He can be a 10. in terms of Emil. If we have an injury to Emil, one of the biggest things I'm hearing on the timeline is what happens if there's an injury to Partey and Afcon and things with DM. Well, what happens if we have an injury to Emil? Who is there in the squad that's able to provide that? I have no idea. I don't even have a player that's close in our squad to what Emil offers us,
Mm,
and that scares me a lot more than some of the DMs because look, although I think Sambi isn't ready, he's shown an ability that he can replicate things that we need in the back there. He has. Ainsley, who's had excellent kind of performances. We do have physical players that can kind of emulate that. And it's just, I really, really fear if Emil, even Bakayo, like who replaces these types of players? I don't know if we have it. And yeah,
no, we
for
don't.
me, I think we need to sign a real six. I agree with Yo-Yo. I mean, when you
Mm.
say that they could have been coached, they were coached to play centrally in the academy. That's where they thrived. And so let's just get a six that really properly makes the most out of Partey, not only him, but Emil, Saka. Like it has a knock-on effect in the whole part of the team. It's a big cog. And lastly, not to continue this rant, but it's an identity piece. Who we sign to partner Thomas Partey tells you everything about where we're gonna go, in terms of where Arteta sees this team. So I think it's the most important one. I don't want to rush it. Um, and again, I think January is going to give us some info because I definitely think we do something regardless of whether good, bad, you agree with it or not, we do something. And for me, I just need another data point in that midfield and attack because right now it's been Willian and Odegaard. That's not enough for me to see. In,
Oh God.
in, in defense, I have
Yeah.
like 5 players, and I can describe to you what kind of player he wants, right? Like I've got 6 examples, even if they weren't his type. Mari, Cedric, Ben White, Tomiyasu, Ramsdale. Like I can describe to you the
We've
defense he
signed
wants.
so many defenders, it's mad. Like
It's
we
crazy. I
definitely
just
have done the defense, like we've done that to death. But yeah,
defense
it's that
first.
little
Yeah.
bit it's that little bit of excitement and a little bit of anxiety knowing
Hmm.
that if you are a midfield type of person that this signing means so much. But
Hmm.
again, like you said, if the availability for the perfect person is not in January, and personally, I think that they were prepared to go through this season with Xhaka, like with this group. I think they were
Yeah.
prepared to go through with this group. Had Xhaka not gotten injured, I think, I think that's the only reason why I could see maybe doing something, but something will happen. Like something will happen, but it will. I don't think it'll be what's going to happen in the summer, because there's plans for that already. So,
I think it's like how I look at the January. I've never. It's not often. Look, Aubameyang's like the anomaly to this scenario, but it's very rare that teams spend more than 30 million pounds in the January transfer window and buy pillars of their team. It's normally something really special about the situation that they're forced into that, like a big player leaving and then they have to replace. Like it's not something that clubs realistically do. So for me in my mind, I temper that and I basically say, when I'm in January, you got a 30 million pound budget maximum. Like, what can you do with that 30 million to maximize your season? And like you said, I think they look at Shaka and say, he's Mr. Durable. We can band aid this till the summer. Um, Again, I don't know if I agree. I'm a big midfield guy. It's why I struggle because I don't think that's the right calculus. But I can understand it as long as they get somebody else up top again, like an Awar who can help us out in the final third, because that again is something that I really think is an issue right now. That would help us in that second phase to the good quality chances thing that I keep harping on, and it would give me a data point. Does that help? Like adding that person, just as does it happen the way I think it will happen? Do we start to get a lot more goals? Do people start to not understand that that was the problem, but do we learn something about this team? That's what we need to
yeah.
fix. Because I think
Yeah.
Awar is one of those band-aid Swiss Army knives that you don't go wrong, especially at 30 million. If you want to become a 3, he can do a 3. If you want to be a 4-2-3-1, he can do that. Like pick players that don't limit you. That's the
Mhm.
one thing I really want to see.
Yeah, Yo-Yo makes an interesting point that Ruben Neves, we can assume was Arteta and Locatelli was Edu. I don't know. I don't know. But neither would have helped Party. And I kind of
Yeah.
feel like I just think it would have been more Xhaka, That's what I think. That those links
Yeah.
were very worrying to me because I was like, so we're just going to replace Xhaka with Xhaka. And I know that there's in certain ways they're probably superior to him. But let's be real, they're deep lying-ish, playmaker-ish type players, and they're not necessarily super athletic. They're not gonna really be able to sweep up and sit alone and let Thomas Partey do his thing. So I think over the summer, these were some worrying links. But do you kind of agree with Yo-Yo that neither of these would have helped Thomas really?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of described who Thomas Partey was, and it's not those profiles to me.
Not those.
Not those
Not
profiles.
those. This is interesting. Merry Christmas says, "You guys are American." Well, I'm American and George is Canadian. But what about Tyler Adams rumors? I think I like for Arsenal that Yunus Musa. What about him? Yunus Musa was in our academy. Peace
Yeah.
Hill End. That's why you like him. Uh, Eh, I think Yunus Musa is amazing, but when
Yeah.
I look at people for Arsenal, one, I think it's weird to bring somebody back that was in your academy, but he's so young and he wouldn't help us. In terms of Tyler Adams, I love Tyler, and I think he does play that number 6 role and could be a CDM, and he's really kind of, like, aggressive and punchy on the ball, and he's somebody that's I'm not gonna I'm not gonna diminish him by this, but he's Coquelin-esque to me, where he's aggressive in the tackle, but he's a little bit better on the ball. But for me personally, I think that as much as I would take him, obviously, I'm like wave my American flag around and just like cry and be like, "Oh my gosh, Tyler!" I think we need something a little bit better than Tyler. I think it
Yeah.
needs to be Basuma. It needs to be someone a little bit more there already. And I have questions around Tyler's ability on the ball. I think even if it's a 6, that's just going to be a destroyer. They still need to have some.
Technical
They need to have,
destroyers, I
yeah,
call
they
them.
need, yeah, exactly. So, love Tyler, would take him as some sort of backup option, another option in the group of players that are there. But 40 million is a lot to pay when you could probably pay 10 more and get a Basuma that's he's levels above Tyler Adams for me.
It depends what the question is. Like, do I want Tyler Adams for squad depth? Cool. I don't mind him for squad depth. Am I asking him to be a starter in this team to complement Thomas Partey? Heck no, not of the quality for me. But he's one of those utility players. In profile, like if Ainsley went and we got him in for that same role, like I'd understand it. He's one of those very big utility players. It's just he's not of the level for a starting quality for me. And I think Yunus Musa is just another profile that's not quite what we need. He and I love him too. Like I was really upset when he left. In terms of how I understood it, but I mean he was a special player and he's proving it. It's just not the player that I think we necessarily need. And so it's going to be a no for me on those two specific players.
Yeah, 100%. Last question, Jonathan David, you are Canadian. So, Jonathan David is somebody that is kind of on the lips of a lot of Arsenal fans looking at strikers and things of that nature. He's been really good. I think he scored again for Lille today. Tons of goals for national team, tons of goals in Ligue 1. What do you
Mhm.
think about him in terms of like somebody that you could bring in for a striker? And do you think he's similar to Balogun at all? Like, when I look at him, I think, do we actually would we wanna bring in somebody like that if Balogun is kind of, like, right there? What do you think about Jonathan David before we get out of here?
Yeah, like in profile, he's that false nine that's 5'9". Like I use that kind of as my descriptor for him. Got a lot of interesting qualities. I don't think he ever has the technical level, but he's just such a hard worker. Like that guy, he's had a really interesting story, in terms of his career. And he's gonna make the most. He's gonna be like a Giroud in the sense that he'll milk everything out of his career as humanly possible. That's the type of mentality that you're getting with him. In terms of the
Mhm.
profile, it's oddly specific to like your Eamon Gouris from Nice, your Lacazettes, your Balagans. That's the profile. It's basically somebody that isn't phenomenal in the air, but does a lot of dirty work, will press till he dies, is clinical in the final third. It's just again, it's not really somebody that I prefer at the striker role. Maybe that's subjective bias coming in about what I personally prefer to see. But in terms of Jonathan David, I don't think he's at that level that we could do. For example, like if you really wanted a 9 and I had to play devil's advocate, George, you're not getting what you want. Who are you getting to play that role? Dominic Calvert-Lewin, hands down. That's the man that you should go for. That's really somebody that can run the outlets a lot more. Something that Jonathan David doesn't really like to do. He's ball to feet. He comes in and really wants to talk about, what he can do in that congested third. He's a backboard player. He'll receive and lay it off, or spin and then be open for a tap in. Something like that. That's his style of play. I just feel he's not technically quite what I prefer, and even of the quality long term. But he's a very, very good player. And like as a plan B, it would be awesome. It's just I don't know if he's worth the money for me.
Yeah, I look at him and I just think, why don't I just wait on Balogun? I don't think they're
They're so
necessarily
similar.
that different at all. Yeah. So that's just me. I looked at it, I was like, whatever. Oh, talking ball, last question, just because you're here and people have been missing you. What is your ideal window?
Yeah, so in January, my ideal window is to secure Sam Johnson, who's in the last 6 months of his deal on a free, to have us a backup goalkeeper for next
Forgot
season.
all about him.
Uh, I really want to sign Dennis Zakaria because for me, Mohamed El Neni leaving at the end of the summer, I would like to replace experience. Another person that I've talked about is Boubacar Kamara, but for me, my big money is always being spent on that DM, and I'm not using Boubacar Kamara as squad depth, and it's not fair for him to do that either. So I think Dennis Zakaria is an excellent market opportunity that we need to take advantage of. And again, he's free the last 6 months of his contract. I think as long as El Neni's here, we won't buy him for the now, but sign him on pre-contracts, both of those. You've spent nothing, first two steps. Then,
Yep.
yes, Husam Awar, 100% is what I would do to buy in January. And then you basically move to the summer. And my ideal with getting, Champions League football is getting Declan Rice. I don't hide that kind of on here. For me, he is exactly what we need. It's my dream partner for Thomas Partey, and I would spend a majority of our funds on that player, up to basically 100 million. Like that's how much I value this position. Um, and I would also get Rydal Baku for right back because for me, the ability to have an overlapping right back who's versatile, who can be inverted, also a backup winger, but also an excellent right back. Like that for me adds a ball carrying progressor in every third of the pitch. Exactly what I was saying. Probably works out to around 165 million pounds.
Ooh,
Which
you
is
got
basic.
expensive taste.
I got expensive taste, but I'm thinking this is my Champions League window. And then I've got, in terms of those that are maybe some realistic opportunities to not the Rice and, don't have a Champions League. People that I really like are Mohamed Kamara from Leipzig, who's really, really good in terms of a DM. Leslie Igochukwu is like a really good prodigy at Rennes, who's like 17 years old as a DM, who's absolutely immense. And then some other DMs that I like are Ibrahima Diallo as well for that DM kind of position. In terms of the opposites to Awar, I really don't have an alternative. That man's just versatile Swiss Army knife. He's somebody that I need to go get. And then in terms of right back, really really tough one because that's a really really small market. So I'll have to get back to you on some more realistic opportunities for right back for that role because I don't see somebody offering us what Rydal Baku would offer us. If you want somebody more inverted, Livermento's the best of that profile. But again, it's not really that overlapping option. So that's what my best window is.
Perfect. Well, let's end it there. We've covered all the bases, did some tactical stuff, did some transfery stuff, talked about XG. Really hope you
Yeah.
guys like the show. Again, mostly Tactical Tuesdays are for members, but we opened it up to everybody today so that if you are not a member and you're like, I'll maybe join, this is what you be getting every single Tuesday here at She Knows Arsenal as a member after the games. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed it. There's still about 80 of you guys watching. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. UK time to do something. I don't know. I cannot tell you guys what I'll be talking about. I'll wake up and check the internet and see what we're going to talk about. But later on that day, we're going to be doing our first Anything But Arsenal show. Anything But Arsenal. Gav Mack will be here. Anything But Arsenal. So we're not going to talk a lot of Arsenal, obviously. Talk a little bit of Champions League, talk about the new management positions, who's going to survive, who's going to get sacked, all of those types of things, and just have a good time. So make sure you guys are subscribed. Thank you, George. Thank you so much. Can you let everybody know where they can find you? They keep asking about Ball Over Passion, but if I literally, if I don't every single time I say it, it's like they don't hear it. So maybe if you say it, they'll follow it.
Yeah, yeah, no, we've got our own show kind of on YouTube. You just type in Ball Over Passion. You can find us at BOP Footy on Twitter as well. And yeah, you can find my socials at GeorgeV_AFC.
Perfect.
But make sure you guys like and comment, subscribe on this video because Jess is making some waves.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Tony, I will not be talking LAFC on here. Nobody gives a shit. Maybe I'll do like an MLS show and see if anybody cares, but like nobody gives a shit about LAFC but me. But yeah, oh, how much do I pay George? I pay George in love. Like I'll probably send him like a Starbucks card like for Christmas.
That's all I need. I'm very cheap, guys. Just give me my Starbucks.
Because that's what he wants. But
hopefully
yeah.
she lets me out of the storage closet, guys. I'm hoping. I've been asking for so long.
Storage closet.
I need a better background.
Exactly. But yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.